Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew. As Andrew mentioned, my name is Ryhor Astapenia, and I am currently an Academy Fellow at Chatham House. Also run the Center for New Ideas, which is Belarusian civil society organization. Before that, to avoid a military service, I did a PhD in political science at the University of Warsaw and worked together with Yaroslav at the Ostrogorski Center. So, this year, I'm writing a paper on Belarusian elites because I think we pay too much attention to Lukashenka and very little to Belarusian ruling elites. A large portion of decision-making in Belarus, of course, is conducted almost single-handedly by Lukashenka, but he couldn't govern himself and without his ruling class, and unfortunately we know very little about these people. Moreover, I think that Belarusian elites right now seem to be waking up as increasingly technocratic government plays an ever larger role. So, and moreover, if Belarus adopts a new constitution, as Alexander Lukashenko promises, in the next 5 years, their role will increase even more. And it is also highly likely that eventual Lukashenko successor will come from the current ruling elite, especially taking into account the insignificance of the democratic opposition in Belarus. And it is thus important to study Belarusian elites not only to be able to understand the current regime, but also to be able to forecast and navigate the political system that will come after it. So, today I will speak about one specific aspect of my paper, about people who work in Belarusian state institutions, people who are actually around Alexander Lukashenko. Before pointing out differences among elites, it is worth considering their similarities. First of all, almost all of Belarusian officials try not to have views, at least publicly, not to comment publicly about their views on economy or on politics. And they think that having views is actually maybe kind of dangerous. They would like to be very bureaucratic in their work. And values play a rather negligible role in their activities, and whether an individual is more liberal or reactionary depends to a certain extent on the functional aspects of his or her post. For example, because Belarusian diplomats are in charge of cooperation with the West, so they are more predisposed to consider Western options. The elites also are unified by their atomization. They do not think of themselves as a kind of groups with separate group identities. So, now let me show you the matrix. I love the word the matrix, which illustrates the divisions inside Belarusian political elites according to their attitude towards reforms, towards any changes. Today we can identify several groups, types: the directorate, economic liberals, post-Soviet elites, and modernizers. The surnames on the following slides are listed according to the cluster these people belong to, but they are not leaders actually of these clusters because there are no leaders at all in these types. So, the first type is economic liberals. They usually work in the national bank or in the part of the government which is responsible for the economy. They are the most favorably inclined to the liberal economic reforms, and they are also the most westernized, to the extent that it is possible to use these terms with regard to the Belarusian elite. They are most willing to cooperate with the business community, and they consider it to be the driver of the economy. Although economic liberals are hardly numerous in the Belarusian system, they are relatively influential and they control financial strips. Representatives of this type are relatively young, and actually what is interesting that many of them were trained at educational trainings hosted by the international financial institutions. And the fact that the head of the National Bank or the government can now be considered moderately liberal is less connected to the value transformation within the elite, but with the structural change in Belarus. Economic difficulties made it necessary to Belarus to have a more competent elites, and these appeared to be liberals. Although much has been made of value differences between this group and Alexander Lukashenko, actually economic liberals serve as one of backbones for Alexander Lukashenko, because without competent technocratic officials, the Belarusian economy would be even worse. So, the next type is Modernizers. Usually, members of this grouping belong to the non-economic sphere, and they are not attracted by the West or liberalism. They seek to modernize the current political model and improve its functioning. Political freedoms are of no interest to them, and they are inclined to think that Belarusian state actually could afford to be less repressive. Representatives of this type are distributed among different state institutions. Like economic liberals, modernizers do not seem to be particularly numerous, but they are highly influential because of their competencies. For example, the heads of the two parallel ministries are representative of this grouping as Vladimir Makey, who is MFA, and Yuri Karao, who is Minister of the Interior. Compared with the previous Minister of Interior, Igor Shunevich, who would wear NKVD uniform for public holidays, Yuri Karao seems to be much more open and much more modern, even though political arrests and persecution during his tenure are still continuing. Here you go, the Red Directorate. Usually these people run state-owned enterprises or work in state concerns or ministries. Well, in this slide you can see just only one person actually, Valery Belsky. It's not a bug, it's a feature. And because actually the Red Directorate is actually rather faceless. But it's influential because the role of the state sector is still prevalent in the Belarusian economy, although its role is decreasing. Since Belarusian state-owned enterprises are often economically ineffective and oriented toward the Russian market, representatives of this group are interested in preserving the current political economic model. Thus, the pro-Russian orientation of the Red Directorate is not just a matter of values. Access to the Russian market remains a precondition of the survival of the enterprises. And the Red Directorates are often regional elites. Their significance to the political system is fading as the state is allocating less money to Belarusian state enterprises. Post-Soviet elites. These people work mainly on the social sectors of the government, which spend but do not earn money, for example, Ministry of Education. Their social capital usually depends on maintaining the current political economic model. Just like the Red Directorate, post-Soviet elites are common among regional elites. This type perhaps is the closest to Alexander Lukashenko in terms of values. He is also a post-Soviet regional elite. However, he cannot rely on these people too much because they usually are not very competent to run the country. And although this type is not included in the matrix, as in many other countries, certain individuals in Belarus have kind of inherited their positions. Such people include the current Prime Minister and the first Deputy Prime Minister, whose parents also occupied top posts in the country. It is hard to assess the influence of this type, but the situation is probably comparable with other European countries. So family ties and connections can give some career boosts to people, but actually there are no shortcuts to the top in Belarus because Alexander Lukashenko fights the clanship in his system. So this group probably enjoys the greatest degree of independence within the system, as any attempts by Lukashenko to curtail it may be perceived as a threat to the entire political system and to the entire ruling class. So let me stop here. I'll be very grateful for any comments, for any ideas what other types I should include in the matrix or in my paper, and thank you very much.